Hey, what is up everybody, Platform Disciple here, continuing our review of the new set Rebellion, starting off where we left off last time at Genesis, and here is Crazed Augmenter, who we've already talked about. So my opinion of him has not changed much, which is that for a 5-cost card that isn't artificial, I just don't like him very much. Admittedly, +6/+6 is very big, and it can be even bigger if you put it on something with flying, multiple lives, or multi-strike, but because it's not artificial and it's double Genesis, and it's hard to take advantage of double Genesis without having some kind of artificial theme, and the high cost, I don't see the card being very good. That being said, in Rift Run, I think it has a lot of potential, because in Rift Run, having a large stat boost can be pretty important. And it's also worth noting that Genesis has access to very powerful buff cards already, including Upgrade, which is not far off from the +6/+6 that you're going to get for using Crazed Augmenter. So it's a little opportunity costs. I mean, you pick one or the other, but Upgrade costs so much less that it's hard to say that Crazed Augmenter is going to be any good. Moving on, Defiant Engineer we've already talked about, but since last time, I've come to realize that I think the card has a very good place in Logarithmatron decks, because Logarithmatron, you're going to be overcharging cards almost every turn either way, so getting +1/+1, especially very early in the game, can be very important. Of course, to do this, you have to move Logarithmatron to the support zone, which makes it vulnerable to things like spontaneous combustion, which is why you will not do it in matchups that can hit the support zone. But in certain matchups, like, for example, against Flamed On, there's no harm in putting in the support zone, so you might as well. And take advantage of that +1/+1. Alright, Enlightenator XT2500, also another card we talked about, and like I said last time, very good stats. It is artificial, it's cost efficient. Big trouble is that you have to use Descendants of the Dragons, and I don't know what Descendants of the Dragons deck works well with Genesis, and I don't know if there is one yet, but if one comes out, if somebody figures out how to make those two factions work well together, Enlightenator has a lot of potential as one of the best highest stat vigilance characters available. Alright, little Timmybot. Let me begin by saying that a lot of these cards are worth talking about in reference to this BabyBots deck that I have created, or any other deck that's very similar. What I want to say is that with cards like Taiga, Alita, and Lucca, any artificial character that costs 1 that's for Genesis is automatically on the board as a potentially playable card. And Little Timmybot dies and draws you a card. It's an extremely powerful effect. I'm going to go out ahead and say that I would be running this card in my BabyBots deck even if it was a 1/1, because the effect is so strong and it's a 1-cost artificial character, and 1-cost artificial characters are so crucial for this kind of deck, and it's hard to get enough of them. So yeah, definitely a very powerful card, and it has applications in other decks as well. So that's a 10 out of 10 right there. Okay, next, Lucca Rebellion Leader is also worth talking about with reference to this deck, but also any Genesis deck, almost said Overseers, any Genesis deck that uses a lot of characters, normally aggro decks, because this card completely hoses Mass Death and pretty much Veror in general. It like being able to protect your entire board from Mass Death. You can just dump everything into the assault zone with absolutely no chance of your characters dying, which is so powerful. The weakness of the card, of course, is it's a high cost card, and in the matchups that shield is not relevant. Like, for example, once again, against Flamed On, it's just not worth using. So I think as a sideboard card, it's very, very, very powerful. Or if the meta has a lot of destroy effects like Veror cards, it's going to be very, very powerful. Definitely a sideboard card, definitely a good card. All right, next, Splitter Light we've already talked about, and it already has a home in my Baby Bots deck. It's very, very stat efficient. It's a splitter robot light, so I mean, like, just like the card implies, it's so good. It has so much value as a early character because it can block multiple times. It can very, very effectively receive AoE buffs like Lucca if it dies because you have 2 characters, and it itself can die up to 3 times, triggering Taiga 3 times. This is a 10 out of 10 in my book. In addition, I gotta say, it does have one weakness. I don't think it's a weakness that I care about. I'm still using it, but it has a deceptively high morale cost because it has 2 here, and then the 2 guys that it makes, I believe, have 3 morale, so it comes out to 8, which is quite a bit for a character that you are planning on throwing under the bus. But that being said, I think it's worth it, and even when your opponent's playing a morale burn deck, there's other things that you would probably sideboard out first. I think it's just a very good card. And we've already been talking about Taiga quite a bit. Taiga is worth talking about a lot. I think the card is insanely, insanely good, and I've already described why. You play so many low-cost characters, you can throw them under the bus, and you're getting buffs for all your other characters. This card is just so good. I've only really used it in this Triple Genesis Baby Bots deck, but it can be used other places too. And the one thing that I need to talk about that I haven't talked about in the past is that there was a very brief period where Taiga could not buff herself, and she now buffs herself again, so that nerf got reverted. And the reason I need to bring this up is because I would be using this card as a 4 of, as in 1 in the command zone, 3 in the deck, either way, and that is just a testament to how powerful that effect is. And if they nerfed it again, I'd still be using it, just like I said. So whether or not it gets changed again, and I do need to say this right now, and this applies to every card I talk about, they could be buffed or nerfed. Nerfs are more likely in the future. So I'm not saying Taiga will be, but it could be nerfed and I'd still be using it, is all I'm trying to say. Okay, next up, Biginator. This is a very, very meta-changing card, I think. First, let's just say that, like I said before, any 1-cost artificial character is already worth talking about for Genesis because although I'm not using it now in my Baby Bots deck, like, you can take advantage of any 1-cost artificial character in Genesis. It's that good. But in addition, this card really, really changes the playing field for Logarithmatron decks, which in the past I would say were fun, but not great. But now that it has access to the Biginator, who, by the way, has a 10 out of 10 dance, gotta stop and say that. But now that it has access to the Biginator, you can actually take control of the board, or at least defend, a lot better than you could before early on, which gives the deck a lot more time to make Logarithmatron big enough to hit for lethal. And in addition, I want to say that I've seen lists that have opted to take Warpath out, so you can't do the one-shot with Hakim and Logarithmatron, but they use 2 Biginators and 1 Logarithmatron, and you have the Logarithmatrons are just so big. Excuse me, not the Logarithmatron. The Biginators get so big so quickly that it matters a lot. And lastly, I want to say that it does trigger when your opponent overcharges, which, I mean, I don't know how I feel about it. It's kind of like a soft counter to other overcharge cards, but it's a little weird because you run into the super awkward situation where both you and your opponent are playing Logarithmatron Biginator decks, and the Biginators are gonna like just blow up in size insanely quickly. So it's just worth noting. I don't know if it's a big deal. Oh shoot, I gotta go back to Lucca. I forgot about something that I didn't mention. I have not tested this yet, but I will test it at some point. Tome of the Dead. If Tome of the Dead can be blocked by Lucca's effect, then Lucca and Tome of the Dead could be used together to secure a massive board advantage. I haven't tested this, and the reason why I need to test it is because Lucca's shield effect only applies until the end of the turn, and the Book of the Dead triggers at the end of the turn, so it really depends on whether they lose shield first or whether the characters get hit by Tome of the Dead first, because you're either going to have all your characters die or none of them die, and that's clearly a big deal. So I haven't tested it yet. If it if you can prevent all your characters from dying, you'll definitely see me make a deck around it in the near future. Okay, next up, Defiance. Target character loses all text and gets +6/+6. Let's start off by saying that this is generally going to be used on your own characters, I think, but it costs 1 more than upgrade and only gives 1 more power and health. So generally, upgrade will be better as just a straight buff spell. You can use both, admittedly, but it's also worth noting that Defiance can be used on your opponent's characters, because some characters, giving them +6/+6 is actually going to be less harmful than the effect on the character. But lastly, I want to say, and I haven't thought of all the cards that this might apply to, but there are cards that have drawbacks. One that came up immediately that I thought of was Bad Bot. You can use Defiance on Bad Bot to make it a 21/21 with no drawbacks. It can actually attack now, and that's a big deal. So the more you can take advantage of wiping a character's drawback off, the more potential Defiance has, and we'll have to wait and see whether the removing a character's drawback is going to be relevant enough or not. And next we have Dragon Collar. We've already talked about this. It's been changed a little. I don't know if it was changed since last time I talked about it or if it got changed before I talked about it, but now it has to target a character on the battlefield, which makes it a lot weaker. It used to be able to unconditionally target anything, and it's still a unique ability, which is a little strange. I don't know if that's necessary. It really hoses your opponent if you actually pull this card off, but now that it has the ability to miss and your opponent can play around it, I don't feel like it needs the unique tag, especially since I think there's only one other, no, there's Death Blast and the Calamity. I think they actually changed to Death Blast though, so Dragon Collar might be the only one. Yeah. Dragon Collar and Calamity, I think, are the only unique abilities, and Dragon Collar is very clearly not as unique sounding as the Calamity would be. I don't know. So I feel like that could be removed, but that being said, the card is very good as a sideboard card either way. Like, my complaints aside, it's very good. All right, Gorgon Beam, and this card, I mean, like, it's definitely designed to force the Omnitron deck just a little bit over the edge, or make it a little better. And it does this by giving you +1 artifact in addition to killing an opponent's character. I think the card has a lot of potential. As you can see, I'm using it in my deck. One thing worth noting is that the artifact that it gives you has no abilities regardless of the abilities of the character you targeted. So if you were thinking of targeting like a Bromic and still receiving his effect, actually I don't even know if Bromic's effect would technically work from the support zone anyways. He might have to be in the assault zone. Let me check. Yeah, he has to be in the assault zone. So Bromic was a bad example. A better example would be if for some reason you manage to get your opponent's chef. You're not going to have an artifact with chef's ability. You're just going to have an artifact that doesn't do anything. But importantly is that it reduces the cost of Omnitron. So I think the card's decent, and it definitely opens up the window for a very, very forced Omnitron deck to actually function, and I like that a lot because it gives a more diverse meta, potentially. Next up, Rapid Iteration, and this card costs 2, it is 1 purity, it is a buff spell, so you gotta immediately try to compare it to Upgrade, which I've talked about many times in this video. So you're probably very familiar with it at this point, but we're gonna look it up anyways. So it gives the Rapid Iteration gives +4/+4 divided as you choose among characters, and Upgrade is gonna give +5/+5 to one character. So Rapid Iteration gives less in total, but it has some unique effects, like for example, if your opponent has Yuan-Shi's Wrath, which is going to do 4 damage to all characters, being able to push all of your guys outside of Yuan-Shi's Wrath range is pretty powerful, whereas Upgrade could only push one of them out of Yuan-Shi's Wrath range. So I think the card has some potential, but for the time being, I like Upgrade more. But like I said, there is that potential there. Okay, next up, the Humans Are Dead, and this is an end game card for Overseers. Non-artificial characters take 10 damage. So obviously you're going to be using it in a deck that uses largely artificial characters or doesn't care about killing its own characters for whatever reason. I want to begin by saying that I think this is going to be a sideboard card either way, because it's completely worthless against other Genesis decks, and it's completely worthless against control decks. But against certain factions, the Humans Are Dead has the potential to just kill their entire board, which is very powerful. So as sideboard card, I think it has a very fair amount of potential as sort of a fallback situation for Genesis. And our last card, this is a really funny card to talk about, is Placebotron, which of course is a placebo artifact. It costs 0, and it doesn't do anything. The funniest thing about it is, and I don't know if it does this except in-game, is that right now it's got this flavor text, but in-game at least, the artifact occasionally takes on attributes like all your characters get +0/+0, or something like that, effects that do nothing. So it's a funny joke, but in addition to being a funny joke, the card I think has some serious viability in the deck that we're already looking at for ramping out Omnitron. And ordinarily I might say something like Mechanism is generally going to be better, because once you play one Genesis Researcher, they cost the same amount. But that being said, the whole point of this list that you are seeing in front of you is to churn out artifacts as quickly as possible, and you don't care what they do. So an artifact that costs 0 and does nothing is fantastic for this deck, and you can get Omnitron out as early as like turn 7, which if you can survive to turn 7 but have Omnitron out, you're in business. You've secured a victory for almost all purposes, because Omnitron has shield 1. It's super hard to kill Omnitron when it comes out, and if you're not already dead, then you have a very good chance of just being able to slowly win the game or quickly win the game, depending. And that is all of our Genesis cards. So in the next video, we're going to be looking at the new Varroa cards.